January 13, 2003, Susan Wright, a 26-year-old Houston mother of two, tied her husband Jeff to their bed with neckties, seduced him with candles, then stabbed him 193 times with two different knives before burying his body in their backyard. She claimed years of abuse drove her to murder in self-defense. Prosecutors said she was after $200,000 in life insurance money. The sensational trial featured a shocking courtroom reenactment where prosecutor Kelly Siegler straddled an assistant on the blood-stained bed to demonstrate how Susan killed Jeff. After 16 years in prison, the blue-eyed butcher walked free on parole in 2020. This is the story of a murder that divided opinion between domestic violence victim or cold-blooded killer. A quiet residential neighborhood in northwest Harris County, Texas. Inside their modest home, 26-year-old Susan Wright and her husband Jeff, 34, had been married for 5 years and had two young children, 4-year-old Bradley and 18-month-old Kaylee. From the outside, they appeared to be a normal young family. But that night, something happened in their bedroom that would shock the nation and raise questions about domestic violence, self-defense, and the limits of justified homicide. According to evidence presented by the prosecution, on January 13, 2003, Susan Wright, 26, tied her husband, Jeff Wright, 34, to their bed and stabbed him 193 times with two different knives. She buried his body in their Houston backyard. 193 stab wounds. The brutality of the attack was almost incomprehensible. But what drove Susan Wright to commit such extreme violence against her husband? Susan Lucille Wright was born April 24, 1976. She met her husband in 1997 while working as a waitress in Galveston, Texas. They were married the next year while she was 8.5 months pregnant with their first child, a son named Bradley. A couple of years later, they had a second child, a daughter named Kaylee. The early years of their marriage appeared happy from the outside. Jeff worked as a carpenter. Susan stayed home with their young children. But according to Susan's later testimony, beneath the surface, their marriage was marked by violence and drug abuse. Susan would later testify that Jeff frequently used cocaine and became violent when under the influence. She claimed he physically abused her throughout their marriage and that she lived in constant fear for herself and her children. But prosecutors would paint a very different picture of Susan Wright, not as an abused wife driven to desperate self-defense, but as a calculating killer motivated by money. What happened on the night of January 13, 2003, became the central question at Susan Wright's trial. Two competing narratives emerged, each telling a radically different story about the same night. According to Susan's testimony, Jeff came home that night in a cocaine-fueled rage. Susan claimed that Jeff frequently used illegal substances throughout their marriage, and he often became violent while under the influence. So when he came home in a rage after a cocaine binge on January 13, 2003, 26-year-old Susan decided to put an end to the abuse once and for all. According to court records, Susan claimed that on that fateful night, Jeff had focused his anger on the children, hitting 4-year-old Bradley in the face. He then allegedly raped Susan and threatened to kill her. Susan testified that after Jeff allegedly raped her and threatened her life, she managed to grab a knife. Once she started stabbing him, she claimed she couldn't stop. "I couldn't stop stabbing him, I couldn't stop," Wright testified, according to Cairo 7. "I knew as soon as I stopped, he was going to get the knife back and he was going to kill me. I didn't want to die." But the prosecution told a completely different story about what happened that night. Assistant District Attorney Kelly Siegler argued that Susan had methodically planned her husband's murder. In Siegler's eyes, Wright seduced her husband, tied him to the bed, stabbed him, and buried him in the backyard in order to obtain his life insurance money. According to Siegler, Susan sexually lured Jeff, accounting for why candle wax was found on his body. The forensic evidence revealed red candle wax on Jeff's legs and groin area. Pre-mortem nicks were present on the victim's penis and eyeball, something Kelly Siegler considered signs of torture. The medical examiner's report was horrifying. Jeff had been stabbed 193 times with 2 different knives. The murder was so brutal that the tip of the knife, which matched the one found in the flower pot, was found inside the victim's head. The knife tip had broken off inside Jeff's skull during the frenzied attack. After killing Jeff, Susan faced the problem of disposing of his body. At trial, Susan claimed that she sat up all night after killing her husband, terrified he was going to rise from the dead and come after her again. She later tied him to a dolly and wheeled him into the backyard, where she buried him beneath potting soil in a hole that he'd recently dug to install a fountain. The grim irony, Jeff had dug his own grave weeks earlier, intending it for a decorative fountain. Susan tried to clean the bedroom with bleach and paint, but blood evidence was everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, the floor, all showed evidence of the violent struggle and systematic attack. And several days later, when she caught the family dog digging up Jeff's body, Susan knew she couldn't keep her secret much longer. On January 15th, just 2 days after killing Jeff, Susan went to the Harris County Constable's office and filed a domestic violence complaint. She claimed Jeff had assaulted her and their son Bradley. She had photos taken showing bruises and scratches on her body. On January 18th, Wright asked her attorney, Neil Davis, to come to her home and admitted to stabbing her husband. Davis contacted the Harris County's district attorney's office to inform it that a body was buried under Susan Wright's house and that she had confessed to the killing. The attorney immediately contacted authorities. A body was recovered from the backyard, and the investigation confirmed what Susan had admitted: she had killed her husband. On January 24th, Wright turned herself in to authorities at the Harris County Courthouse and was arraigned on murder charges the following Monday. 13 months after her arraignment, Wright's murder trial commenced on February 24, 2004. The trial of Susan Wright would become one of the most sensational criminal cases in Texas history, featuring dramatic testimony, emotional outbursts, and a courtroom reenactment that would be talked about for decades. The prosecution's case was led by Kelly Siegler, a veteran Harris County prosecutor known for her aggressive courtroom tactics and theatrical presentations. She had an audacious plan for demonstrating exactly how Susan Wright had killed her husband. In the original trial in 2004, Assistant District Attorney Kelly Siegler had the couple's actual bed into the courtroom to reenact the crime for jurors. She had an assistant lie down on the bed, and she straddled him to show how Susan Wright continually stabbed him while he was tied up. What Kelly did, recreating her take of what happened, was genius. Defense attorney and legal analyst Brian Weiss told Prosecuting Evil. It was courtroom theater. Siegler straddled Sergeant Paul Reynolds on the blood-stained bed, demonstrating how she believed Susan had restrained and repeatedly stabbed Jeff while he was tied down and helpless. The dramatic reenactment was designed to show the jury that this was not self-defense. It was a methodical, sustained attack on a helpless victim. The defense countered with their own narrative. Attorney Neil Davis portrayed Susan as a battered wife who had finally fought back against her abuser. Davis told jurors that 193 stab wounds shows how much Susan feared her husband, the newspaper reported. The defense argued that the extreme number of stab wounds actually supported Susan's claim of self-defense. A woman in absolute terror, fighting for her life, would continue stabbing even after the threat was neutralized because of the overwhelming fear she felt. The defense presented testimony about Jeff's cocaine use. The autopsy had confirmed cocaine in his system at the time of death. They presented evidence of Susan's injuries and her claims of ongoing abuse. In 2008, a new witness came forward. With a reappeal in 2008, a new witness, Misty McMichael, the wife of former NFL Super Bowl champion Steve McMichael and ex-fiancé of Jeff Wright, came forward to tell her story of how she endured abuse and violence during her 4-year relationship with Jeff Wright. This corroborating testimony suggested Jeff had a pattern of abusive behavior with previous partners, lending credibility to Susan's claims. Susan Wright took the stand in her own defense, a risky move that allowed the prosecution to cross-examine her directly. In her emotional testimony on the stand, Wright claimed, I couldn't stop stabbing him. I couldn't stop. I knew as soon as I stopped, he was going to get the knife back and he was going to kill me. I didn't want to die. She testified that on the night of the murder, Jeff Wright was on a cocaine binge and was violent, having allegedly beaten her. But prosecutor Kelly Siegler was skeptical of Susan's emotional displays. During her closing arguments in 2004, Siegler called Susan Wright a card-carrying, obvious, no doubt about it, caught red-handed, confirmed, documented liar, the Chronicle reported. Wright denied the accusation, telling Siegler she covered her face at times to compose herself because the judge had ordered her to do so. I haven't cried on cue once, Wright protested, according to the Chronicle. I don't see how someone could not cry during this. After 5.5 hours of deliberations on March 3, 2004, Susan Wright was convicted of murder. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The jury rejected Susan's self-defense claim. They believed the prosecution's theory that she had murdered Jeff for his $200,000 life insurance policy, not because she feared for her life. Just about everyone in Houston believed Susan Wright was a monster, Wright's appellate attorney, Brian Weiss, told Texas Monthly. Everyone believed that she was some real-life reincarnation of Sharon Stone from the first reel of Basic Instinct. Just about everyone in Houston believed Susan Wright was a monster, Wright's appellate attorney, Brian Weiss, told Texas Monthly. Everyone believed that she was some real-life reincarnation of Sharon Stone from the first reel of Basic Instinct. Susan Wright had become known as the Blue-Eyed Butcher, a nickname that would follow her throughout her incarceration. But Susan's case was far from over. In 2009, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals granted Wright a new sentencing hearing after determining that Wright's counsel rendered ineffective assistance during the punishment phase of trial in 2004. The appeals court found that Susan's trial attorney had failed to present crucial mitigating evidence during the sentencing phase, evidence that might have led to a shorter sentence. At Wright's resentencing hearing, Dr. Jerome Brown testified that she was in a dissociative state in the days after the murder. He also said he diagnosed her with post-traumatic stress disorder. District Judge Jim Wallace, who had presided over Wright's trial, ultimately determined that while Wright indisputably killed her husband, there was a wealth of mitigating evidence not presented at the punishment stage that painted a dramatically different picture of her and her moral blameworthiness. On November 20, 2010, Wright had her sentence reduced to 20 years in prison, 5 years less than her original sentence.